Halim Çalış. Actually, he traveled almost 3.5 hours today in this traffic and the weather. And thank you for being here with us. Halim Çalış received his BA from Ankara University, Divinity School, and his MA on Islamic Theology from Marmara University. He completed another MA on World Religions at Lutheran School of Theology at Chicago. He is currently a PhD candidate in Islamic Studies at the University of Chicago Divinity School. His research interests include the Quranic studies, Sufism, history of Islam, and Ottoman history. Besides the formal education he has received, he has been studying classical sources of Islam since 1990s. He conducts research in English, Turkish, and Arabic. He can also read French and Persian. He has published encyclopedia entries, book chapters, and numerous articles for Turkish and English journals. Din Çalış also served as Vice President of Midwest Islamic Association and Yunus Emre Cultural Center in Chicago, where he has done extensive work with local Muslim American communities, as well as interfaith dialogue work with Midwest faith communities. Please help me welcome Din Çalış.
F5. F5.
F5.
Oh, actually.
That's okay.
I'm using Mac, so.
Yeah, I know.
In my presentation, I will discuss some specific examples from Quran, but my aim is to emphasize some exegetical principles through these specific examples. The principles regarding how we should understand dividing and uniting texts in our scriptures, especially in modern times. When we look at the Quran, we can find both positive and negative statements about non-Muslims, mostly Christians and Jews. I would like to discuss first a negative statement from the Quran. Our example is this verse, which is found in the 5th chapter in the Quran. I picked this verse because this verse is one of the first, most frequently verses in the Quran by the anti-dialogue circles. So this verse takes on specific importance. As you see, the verse has an exclusivist tone by asking Muslims not to befriend Jews and Christians. Now, first of all, I would like to emphasize a very important point. The meaning of the Quran is more than what its letters tell us. Its simple translation is never enough to comprehend its true meaning. When we analyze any verse from the Quran, we should examine the historical reports about that verse, which were abundantly recorded in the exegetical works, and also the linguistic analysis of the Quranic works. As you know, the Quran was not revealed in one piecemeal. Rather, the Quranic parts were revealed sporadically in the course of 23 years. Each part was revealed for an occasion, either as an explanation after an event or as an answer to a question asked. These are called Asbab-ı Nuzul, occasions of revelation. And these are recorded in the exegetical sources. Now, regarding this particular verse, there are some narrations that explain the occasion for this particular verse. All these reports underline the same point. Hypocrites and non-Muslims who were hostile toward Muslims became allies in order to harm the Muslim community. So this verse was revealed as a warning against cooperating with non-Muslims inimical to Islamic community. There are also some hints in the Quranic context to what these reports point out. In the preceding and following verses, we clearly observe the tension between the Muslim community and non-Muslims. Therefore, we conclude that the Quranic portion in which our verse is found was revealed in a highly polemical milieu. In brief, the Quranic context and the historical reports and the occasion of revelation suggest that the verse is closely connected to its historical context. Therefore, we cannot deduce from this particular verse an unconditional interdiction of friendship between Muslims and non-Muslims. In other words, this verse refers to specific people and is about a specific type. I mean, contextual reading leads us to this conclusion. However, when we come to the exegesis of the Quran, we encounter a different story. I have studied the exegesis of this verse from these 6 classical and pre-modern commentaries. Quranic commentators tend to extract from specific Quranic text universal messages and universally binding rules. I don't want to bore you with details, but let me summarize their approach. First of all, they isolate the verse. They don't interpret this verse in the light of the overall meaning of the Quran. And they also make little effort to comprehend the verse in the context of the broader group of verses that seem closely connected to each other. Second, they are very much interested in the historical reports regarding the occasions of revelation, but they use a disapproving tone about establishing relationship with all non-Muslims. Some suggest that the verse lays down an unconditional prohibition of all kinds of relationship with non-Muslims, which binds all Muslims, all times, in all places. But in some of them, we find some statements that represent a moderate approach and suggest that they may point to the conditional aspects of the verse. As for the contemporary commentators, there are 2 recent studies that discuss in detail their approach to this verse. In her article, Johanna Pink analyzes 17 contemporary commentators published in the Arab world, in Turkey and Indonesia. And Munim Sirri also discusses the same subject extensively in his work. According to these scholars, contemporary commentators vary in their understandings regarding our verse. Some Arab and Indonesian commentators interpret this verse under the influence of political events such as colonialism and some political conflicts between East and West. But the majority of contemporary commentators don't see any harm in Muslims' attempt to establish good social relations with non-Muslims. Reformist and modernist scholars, they express relatively more liberal views regarding the meaning and the limits of friendship. But the commentators who incline towards radical views embrace negative attitudes towards non-Muslims, and they tend to disallow categorically all relations between Muslims and non-Muslims. Now, I would like to bring up another contemporary approach to our verse. Fethullah Gulen, a Turkish thinker, contemporary Turkish thinker and scholar who currently lives in the United States, he expresses an outstanding opinion. He also pays attention to the Quranic and historical context of the verse. He concludes that the verse refers to non-Muslims hostile to Islam. According to the verse, does not lay down a categorical prohibition of all kinds of relationship with non-Muslims. Rather, it warns against relations that would be harmful to Muslims. Second, he emphasizes that the verse should be understood and interpreted in the light of the universal principles deduced from the totality of the Quranic principles and the prophetic traditions. These universal principles, according to him, underline peace, dialogue, and social order. So the message of this verse must be taken as contextual, local, and historical. And third, he sees interfaith dialogue as extremely important for many reasons, among which one stands out. He believes that the disorders, injustice, and disturbances we are witnessing in today's world can be stopped only by the efforts of the followers of religions. Therefore, they must cooperate with each other and establish dialogue among them to end this instability. More importantly, Fethullah Gulen applies this hermeneutic not only to this verse, but also to all dividing texts in the Quran. He thinks that negative statements in the Quran have their historical context and cannot be directed against all Christians and Jews. He says the verses criticizing the Jews and Christians are about some Jews and Christians who lived in the time of the Prophet. They do not pertain to all Jews and Christians from that time until now. Or this criticism is about wrong behaviors, in his opinion. He says such criticism is directed against wrong behavior, incorrect thought, resistance to truth, the creation of hostility, and undesirable characteristics. The Bible contains the similar criticisms of the same attributes. But he underlines, this is very important, I think, he underlines that these wrong behaviors cannot be considered as inherent characteristics. But why Gulen, why does he need to develop this understanding? Because he endeavors to persuade his audience about the religious legitimacy of interfaith dialogue, which has vital importance, in his opinion, for both the Muslim community and the world. He says interfaith dialogue is a must today, and the first step is establishing it is forgetting the past, ignoring polemical arguments, and giving precedence to common points which far outnumber polemical ones. Okay, now let's listen to him and look at a uniting text from the Quran. This verse is very important among uniting verses in the Quran, because in this verse, the Quran is talking about the possibility of salvation for others. Salvation is a very important and, how can I say, it is a sensitive subject among the followers of religions. But this verse is talking about the possibility of salvation for other religions. Professor Vincent Cornell, a scholar of Islamic studies, says about this verse that Islam is unique among the Abrahamic religions in opening the door of salvation to its monotheistic rivals. This verse alone is sufficient to condemn intolerant extremist Muslim groups. As a matter of fact, there are many verses in the Quran that praise the followers of other religions, especially Christianity. In this outstanding work, the writer analyzes the Quranic verses that contain positive statements about the Christians and examines the Muslim commentary tradition on these verses. At this point, I would like to remind an important fact. Muslims must believe in the previous scriptures. The Hebrew Bible, the Gospels, the Psalms. This is a religious obligation for Muslims. Also, this is one of the essentials of Islamic faith. Muslims must also believe in previous prophets, Moses, Jesus, and the other biblical prophets. If any person among Muslims denies any of them or disrespects any of them, that person is not considered a Muslim anymore. You can find many passages, touching passages in the Quran about Moses, Jesus, Mary, and other biblical figures. And more interestingly, the Quran contains more details about Moses and Jesus than the Prophet Muhammad. So I think all of these Quranic parts can also be considered as uniting text in the Quran. And lastly, I argue that the social responsibilities loaded by the Quran on the shoulders of Muslims can be taken as uniting parts of the Quran. The Islamic accounts regarding the personal responsibilities of a Muslim in society fall roughly into two categories. In the first category are the verses and the prophetic traditions that forbid Muslims not to harm others or encroach upon their rights. The Quran, for example, is laden with remarks relating to the principle of not harming the others, such as denunciations of corruption, oppression, backbiting, lying, envy, despising others, deceitfulness in transactions, double dealing, selfishness, etc. The second category consists of the Quranic verses and the prophetic traditions that urge Muslims to contribute to society. In this regard, Islam enjoins Muslims to strive for justice, goodness, and protection of social order. There are many Quranic verses and prophetic traditions that impel Muslims to protect and support the weak of the community and to be merciful, helpful, and caring people in society. However, since these exhortations were revealed in a Muslim context, one may think that they refer exclusively to compassion and benevolence towards Muslims. So it is a task for Muslims to adapt these Islamic elements, nurturing social consciousness to multicultural and secular context. But we are observing today that the number of Muslims is growing who contribute to everybody in society, regardless their religions and races. So I think these kinds of verses that talk about social responsibilities also function as uniting text. I think my time is up. I stop here. Thank you.